Hello and welcome to the Service-Based Business Society podcast. I am your host, Tiffany-Ann. On our weekly episodes, we will dig into everything you need to know about scaling your service-based business without losing sleep. With my experience in creating over 7 figures per month and a passion for marketing, finance, and automation, this show will provide tangible tips and techniques for scaling your business. Let's get started. Hello, Meg. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to dive in and chat with you. I was already recording your intro earlier, and I was like, we've got copywriting and coffee and true crime. And I'm like, oh, there's all sorts of goodies here.
I love it. I'm in for all of it.
Awesome. So tell me, how did you get into writing? Have you always liked to write? Is that something that you found passion later in life? I feel like when the guests we have on the podcast, there seems to be this distinct group of people who knew right out of the gate, this was their thing forever and ever. Or there's these people that have these shifts midlife and find these new passions.
Okay. So for me, I definitely am in the first party. It's been a forever and always.
Yeah.
I actually, about a year or two ago, I found a journal from when I was 7. And I had written in there, I was the nerd that totally kept a journal. But I had written in there that when I grow up, I want to listen to old people tell me their stories and I want to turn them into books. I knew that I wanted to be a ghostwriter when I was 7. It just took me, 30 years to come back to that eventually. Yeah, so writing has always been my jam. I've always been writing, even though I was working in the corporate world for someone else doing a million other things for 20 plus years. Writing was always on the sidelines.
As someone who loves to write, I feel like I wrote for so long for school. I actually totaled it up recently. I was in school for well over 20 years by the time I did elementary school and high school and university and my MBA and whatnot. And I feel like it almost stole the joy out of the writing because it was always the reading and the writing. I always loved to read and write, but then, it's it becomes this chore, really. Especially towards the end of my MBA, my dissertation, I felt like it might kill me. And so, but I feel like now because now I've been done school now for a while, I feel like I'm starting to find the joy in it again.
Oh, that makes me so excited. That's a common thing that I hear, especially with people who are starting their own business and getting back into something that they love, whether it be something they've known they've loved forever, or they're just discovering this passion. Getting to write about something that they really, really love and are excited about. And it's not a task. It's not an assigned book report on the Joy Luck Club. It's something that really lights their fire and turns them on, that they start to get excited about writing again. It makes me so happy. I love that.
So you always knew you wanted to write. Did you know, you spent some time in corporate then, obviously. So how did you make that shift away from corporate and into writing more full-time?
So while I was working in corporate, I still had little freelancing gigs. I wrote for a local newspaper. I wrote for some entertainment magazines and publications, just finding a few different options to keep my fingers busy with the writing. Honestly, I had been in the corporate world for a little over 20 years, and it had gotten to the point where the stress and anxiety from doing something and trying to force myself to do something I felt like I should be doing to contribute to society and whatnot, it caused me to be drinking a lot and doing a lot of substances that are not meant to be done in large quantities. And I had, some people would call it a come to Jesus. I had this realization that I needed to make a change. I either needed to find a way to love what I was doing in the corporate world and just deal with it, or to do what I did love. And so I set a goal for myself. Honestly, it was probably in a drunken stupor. I set this goal where I was like, I give myself 1 year to figure out either what I want to do with my life or how to deal with what I'm doing right now. And I realized that if I wanted to make a living writing, I needed to write for people that had money, which I was like, okay, that means I need to write for business owners because they have money to spend on writing. So I'll be a copywriter. And so I created my business, set up a website in the course of a couple of weeks, and 363 days later, I gave notice to my boss, left the corporate world because I was like, I have to make this 1 year goal.
Yes.
So I did the thing, started copywriting, and it was a blast. But I also knew right away that like copywriting wasn't the format for me because I needed a little more fluff. I needed the storytelling aspect of it. And so I knew that like at least in the next 5 years, I wanted to be ghostwriting. I wanted to be helping people write books. And the universe heard me and she was like, I see you. Cool. Plopped 2 ghostwriting opportunities in my lap after about 5 months in business. And I was like, well, I know if I tell the universe I'm not ready, like she may not come back around. So it's like, all right, what's the worst that can happen? Honestly, that's all she wrote. I didn't take on any more copywriting clients after that. I finished up the contracts that I had. And since then, it's now been about 3 years of ghostwriting and coaching others on their writing. And I love what I do every day.
So walk me through the ghostwriting process. I know that I've always been super curious about what that looks like. I have had, different people reach out in the last couple of years who have said like, hey, like you should be writing a book and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, I would love to write a book. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to write it for you. I was like, no, I want to write it. So what is that process? What is that process like? I mean, I enjoy writing. So for me that was, but then I was like, I wonder what that would be like.
Yes.
I of course I had already said no. I wasn't getting any more details at that point. So walk me through, what is that process like?
I love that. And I totally get that. It's people are in, like you said, they're in 2 parties. There are the people that are like, I want a book and I'm going to write it. And then there are the people who are like, I want a book. Crickets. And so those are the people that ghostwriting's for you. It's funny. One of the biggest questions I get asked is, isn't it illegal? And I'm like, no. Ghostwriting is not plagiarism. It is not stealing someone's work. It is a creative contract and agreement between 2 parties that are saying you have a story that you want told, but you either don't want to sit and write it, you don't know how to write it, or you really don't care to. You have better things to do with your time and you're hiring someone to help you. That's what ghostwriting is. It is legal.
I think my number one thing that prevents me from writing a story is, and couple different people have mentioned it in different ways as, guests on the podcast, but, the vulnerability hangover. And so I wrote as part of a group book. So kind of like a Chicken Soup for the Soul type where each person had their own chapter. And I did that just as I was leaving corporate. And I was like, oh, I've always wanted to be a part of a book. Oh, actually, I said I always wanted to write a book. And so I was like, oh, 1 chapter. And it was kind of like it was going to go live just after I left corporate. And I was like, well, this is kind of fun and whatnot. And I remember the first meeting and I, of course, had some ideas and stuff. And then we met with the editor of that first meeting. And she was like, okay, so you're going to write about this. And I was like, oh, but I don't want to write about that. And I think, it was really right as I was leaving corporate. And so she, of course, wanted me to talk about that decision and whatnot. And I think I would just write it so differently now. It was so new. And I was from corporate. And in corporate, we didn't say, it was like, everything's fine. Life is good. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. And so, but now as I have been in the online space and have done my podcast and, there's been that focus on more authentic content. And so you end up sharing way more about, and so I look at it and I'm like, oh, I totally would do it differently now. But of course that was kind of what it was. And so there's definitely some growth in that time.
I guess that's what people see as it's the double-edged sword. It's okay, but once I put it out there, a book is forever. It's not an Instagram post where you can be like, oh, I don't like how my chin looks, I'm going to delete it. Oops. A book is there. It is there. It's happening.
Well, my grandma, of course, was she bought it the day it came out. And so she had it in her hands before anybody else. And so she's like, well, I read it. She was like, you shared a lot. I was like, oh gosh, Grandma. I was like, if I was nervous before, I'm 100 times more nervous now.
That's actually one thing that a lot of...
But now looking, in that moment, I just felt so panicky about sharing that side. But, it's interesting because it is how you connect with people. And one of my best clients who I've now worked with for a year and a half, I work so closely in her business. And so I you get to know each other and you share the life and the journey, and you see how that affects each person's business and what they bring from life and towards their business. And it's so important to be able to take your story or whatever and actually bring it, not to like air dirty laundry, but in a way that just, this is me and this is how I do business because this is me. And being able to convey that in words, I think is truly a gift of whether that's in a story, like in ghostwriting or in copy, is being able to share the story in a way that helps persuade people to understand.
Oh, definitely. Well, and also, I think it's shifting that to, seeing it as, yes, it's a vulnerability, but that's so empowering because we so often think, okay, I'm doing it wrong, or I didn't do that as perfectly as I could. And what we need to realize is that there are a million other people that are behind where we are right now. And I don't mean behind like delayed, but they haven't taken the steps that I've taken, that you've taken. And so, yes, us showing up vulnerable and saying like, okay, I did it. I wrote my first book after I had had emergency back surgery while I was on pain pills, living in a recliner chair in our living room. Like, it was messy. It was not a good look. But I was very open about that and very vulnerable in sharing that because I want people to know that, like, you don't have to have a perfect office set up and you don't have to be perfectly coiffed and have an amazing grasp of the English language. And I mean, start where you are with what you have, and tomorrow you'll be able to look back and say, well, okay, I wish I had done it a little differently, but at least I did it. Oh.
Well, because when I started, it was funny. I remember someone saying, imperfect action is, it beats perfection. And I was like, no. And this whole like done is better than perfect and all of these things that when I started my journey into entrepreneurship, I was like, yeah, I don't subscribe to any of this. None of it. But you do get to the point where you're like, okay, so I'm a person who really does enjoy perfection, and this whole like anti-perfection culture is still not something I subscribe to. However, I do see that like you can wait, you can hold off, you can decide to not move ahead with something, life, business, whatever it is, because you're just like, I don't know yet. And opportunities float on by, whether it's hiring someone or acquiring a different part of business or letting someone go, or, it's like there's all these decisions within business that sometimes you have to be decisive and you have to trust yourself and make a decision and just go for it. Whether it's perfect, whether it's that, but sometimes you just have to go. There is no option to just wait.
Yes. Honestly, probably if I were to nail down the biggest thing that I have done that has changed the trajectory of my business, the starting of additional businesses, where I am now, it has been in the last year that I have really, really leaned into trusting my higher self. And for some people, that's your gut instinct. It's whether you want to call it a higher power, your God, the universe. It's all of the above, all of the above. But just trusting that, like, I do know best for myself, and I may not have the right answer, but at this point right now today, I'm going to make the best decision that I can. And I guess at the end of the day, as long as the decisions I'm making, like, nobody's life is on the line. It's a matter of maybe I post a blog post that doesn't land. Okay, did anyone die? No. I mean, I really hope nobody did. But like, did anyone die? No. Did it cause a horrible accident? Did it change the course of someone's life? No. I did something that was human. It wasn't perfect. And tomorrow I could do it better. And just really getting out of my own way and knowing that my higher self, she knows some shit. She's a smart gal. And I need to listen to her.
It's interesting how we start to have this shift at one point or another where we do start to trust ourselves more. I mean, I am 100% analytical, data focused, like the numbers tell the story, yada, yada, yada. And when I left corporate, it was really on a like, it's my time, I have to go. And I remember like talking to my husband about it, or attempting to talk to my husband about it for a long time, and him just being like, oh yeah, yeah, well, And at one point I'm like, okay, so I'm doing this. And he's like, you're doing what? And I was like, I'm leaving the corporate space and I'm going to start. And he was like, oh, well, that comes out of left field. And I was like, doesn't it? And it was like really this moment where he's like, well, I didn't think you would ever actually do it. And I was like, no. And, people said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. And they were like, no, like they thought I had some crazy harebrained like secret plan, right? That I just like wasn't ready to reveal yet. And I was like, no, I'm serious. I know that it's my time to go. I don't know exactly what I'm doing or where I'm going, but I've got experience and education and this desire to just jump. So here we go. And people were like, because it was very uncharacteristic.
Yes. But I think, when it's, yeah.
So, touching a little bit on the cults and true crime and whatnot, how did you find your passion in this?
Oh my gosh. So I, like many other babies of the 80s, I grew up and the soundtrack from Unsolved Mysteries is like the soundtrack of my childhood. My mom and I would sit in the living room in the evenings and watch Unsolved Mysteries. And I just remember it was like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, but in real life. I was like, oh my gosh, people are going missing. Aliens exist. There's Bigfoot in the woods. Like all of this is a thing. And honestly, it started there. Then I started reading true crime books, probably way too young. And I hope my mom never hears this because I know she'll feel bad about it. Way too young. I was convinced that Ted Bundy was outside of my bedroom window because we lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was totally, didn't sleep for a few weeks. It was all good. But I just was always intrigued by the mystery, the unknown. And then when I got older, it really got even more into how people think and act. And at the end of the day, we're all made of the same stuff. We're all, as people, built of the same, blood, muscle, bone. We're all created with the same stuff. But the fact that there are some people that are wired so differently and just what makes them that way, how people could be that way, how it can be okay to do some of the horrible things. And
it's super interesting. Super interesting. I used to commute a few times a month to it was 4 hours each way and not where there was radio service. And so this was when I found people talked about podcasts for a long time. And I'm always late to the trends. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll check out these podcasts. And so, you get to one thing and you click on here and maybe this and that. And so I ended up finding, and this is how I really got into it. And then basically I was listening to so much that I was out of true crime stuff to listen to. And so that's how I got into the cults and the dictators. I found so I really like the Parcast. I don't know if you're familiar with Parcast. They have a whole series of podcasts. And so, their whole dictator series is super interesting. Again, because it's this piece of how some people go about doing certain things. I also like American Greed is a funny one. I love the voice of American Greed. He's so great. But again, it's these people where you're listening and you're like, I'm sorry, you did what? And you let this go for how long? And some of these people, they are truly committed to whether it is, the cult or the dictatorship or the, business scheme or whatever. And you think you have to really believe you have to really believe that this is the truth to be able to carry this out for years. They carry these things out. Yeah, I find it fascinating.
That's where it's crazy to me is when it is okay, this wasn't just a fly-by-night, oh, I'm the Messiah. There you go. It's the long game. It is. Yes. And it truly is that whole idea of boiling a frog. You put the frog in the pot of water, it's going to jump right out. But if you just turn it up slowly and keep adding little bits of crazy, it's.
Well, it's interesting because, and when I was kind of going through this, what am I going to do? And really trying to understand different parts of leadership and seeing how different people describe it. And, these people, whether they're leading cults or, countries in a dictator style or whatever, they truly have the ability to lead the people to follow them, even to crazy points where you're I'm so, craziness.
Yeah.
And so it's what is it about their leadership style? And so as I was leaving, and doing all of this, because I remember as I was working through corporate, there was this moment where when I joined the executive team and the CEO said, you have to sit at the head of the table. And I was like, why? super introverted, super shy. I'm like, but I sit over here. I've always sat, and I'm like super habitual. So I'm like, but this is my seat. And he was like, yes, but now you're leading the meeting. You have to sit at the head of the table. And I was like, but it makes no difference. I'm like, what? And so, but then I started like trying to like do more research as to like how people were leading and why they like, so super, it's like down a rabbit hole of like, how is it relevant and how does it tie together and stuff. But I find the whole study of the human species in terms of actions and creating action, and it's so, so fascinating.
Well, and I always want to know, my husband laughs because Google is my most used of anything. I'm like, hey, Google, how did this start? What did this happen? Where does that word originate? But like, when did that start? That, okay, sitting at the head of the table symbolizes, and then the rest of us, we accept it because it's ingrained in us from the first day going to work that the person sitting at the head of the table is obviously the one in charge. Like, where does that... I didn't grow up in a house where we had like a head of the table. We had a little table in our kitchen that we sat at, and you sat where you sat. And looking back now, my seat was actually the quote unquote head of the table. I was at the end, but I was also the one closest to the back door so I could let the dog out when we were eating. So I'm like, I don't know where that develops within our lives that we recognize those things and then so quickly follow them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. And I think that as much as there's definitely been growth and progression and change, still not as much in certain areas. And you think, but why is that the way it is? And that's always but why? That's what my mom always says, when you were a kid, that was your question for everything, but why? And I feel like some of these things, and it's interesting how a lack of questions sometimes can leave things untouched. Well, that's the way it's always been.
Yes. Well, and I remember one of my clients in the past, she had said that was one of her biggest issues with the industry she was in, was that every time she would ask a question, she was told, well, that's the way it's always been. That's how it's always worked. And she's like, but why? Like, no, you can't tell me why. Like, sure, it's worked in the past, but things change and evolve. And I think it's the people you have to ask why for things to change. I mean, that's why people like us, we leave the corporate world because we're like, okay, this is no longer fulfilling or fitting what I need it to in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the change is like, we have to leave, we have to go. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw this person on TikTok. I have a TikTok guilty pleasure. And so she's a lawyer. And so I guess she likes to wear pink. I mean, pink is not my jam. But she wears like head to toe pink suits like that movie with the blonde. But she was like getting picked on and like made fun of. And like this was like a thing where the guys were like razzing her about it. So she built like an entire law firm where everyone is like, I mean, it is like 100% Barbie pink, everything. But they're like kicking butt. And you're like, I love it. I mean, I would never do it. You could not pay me to go anywhere in a pink head to toe suit. But it's like, I love that she's just like decided like, this is what I'm doing. And I don't really care what everybody else says. And the fact that it's like, it makes her want to win more just to prove I'm wrong.
I freaking love that. Well, and I think that so much of, I mean, I know with my business myself, and I know you could probably speak to it too. There's always the whole idea of, okay, well, when you start your own business, you have to niche down and you have to find a way to talk to this person and who is your ideal client. And I know for me, I struggled with the niching down. I have a business coach and they were like, well, no, you have to niche down. And I'm like, no, I don't want to say I work with brunette women in their 40s who do this. And like, no, I work with creative, trend-setting, woo-believing badasses. That's my niche. I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you're at. If you fit in there, that's it.
But to me, that is a niche. And, I've heard and been told the same things and have talked about it to a few different people over, the podcast and whatnot, because, for what I do specifically, whether, like I say, like the businesses I work with, whether your team like changes toilets or organizes or house cleans or, is an architect or a therapist or a photographer, what you do when you get there, I'm not helping you with that. That's not my jam. That's your jam. My jam is all behind the scenes.
Yes.
And so whatever you do is what you do. And so I think that,
yes.
But that has been, you hear like, you have to niche down. And I do think your messaging needs to speak to someone, but I think that we often, the way that we group that into like, oh, it's like this industry or it's this age. But really, for me, it's more about when someone is reading your website or when they're reading your social media posts, they're like, yes, this person understands me. And it's just framing it in a different way. It's reaching out to a different group of people. They might share the same industry. They might not, but they have something. There is some part of them that is like a common ground that when they are experiencing you and your brand, that they're like, yes, this person understands.
Well, and doing it in a way that is authentic to you and is going to resonate with those people you want to connect with. I mean, if it's wearing the Barbie pink suit and heels and having an entire law firm that does that, more power to you. Like you said, that's not my jam. My wardrobe is mainly black because then it doesn't show up the coffee that I spill on myself every day. We're good. But I mean, you know, how you present yourself, how you talk, what you're putting out there, I don't feel like it has to fit into a box anymore like it did for so long. Now it's, if you're being authentically you, people will recognize it. People will see it. And yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So if you had one tangible tip for people to implement into their businesses, you can implement this week and really catch that win, what would that be?
Honestly, when it comes to, I mean, my jam is writing. It's words. It's that communication. And one tip for people is to stop second guessing and editing themselves. I know that that's easier said than done, of course, but to really lean into that authenticity and know that what you're writing, what you're saying, your message, if it rings as true to you, then it's not wrong. Put it out there. You know, I'm not saying with giving medical advice, but put it out there and be true to who you are, because then you're going to connect with people in the right way. And it just feels so much better. It's such a relief and such an empowering feeling to not be trying to fit into someone else's box.
Yes. 100% agree. Well, it's been fantastic having you, Meg. And so where can people connect with you? If they're like, I need to work with Megs, I want to write a book, or I want to touch base with her, learn some more, where can they connect with you?
I love it. All of the socials, if you look up Megs Writes, or my website is just www.megswrites.com.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to link those below. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Well, we are all out of time for today. If you guys have not joined the Service-Based Business Society Facebook community, make sure you head on over to Facebook and we can continue the conversation. Be sure to also follow the show by going to any podcast app and searching Service-Based Business Society, click subscribe, click the 5th star, and leave us a written